This picture here looks a lot like what should be a before photo, but it's actually an after photo. Today I'm going to share you the story about how I got seriously fat after years of training hard and following my diet perfectly. Stick around to the end as well, and I share with you everything that I would do differently now if I had the exact same goal of building as much muscle mass as possible. So I found all of my old logbooks that document years of my training and nutrition programs I was following in my early years as a bodybuilder. I've got years of training history here between all of these books and documents. It covers maybe 3 or 4 years between 2009, 10, 11, and 12. Here's something I would call a crazy back day. So back then, this was around 2011 or so, my coach put me through this system where we'd be doing 3 different training styles on 3 different weeks. Week 1, we'd be doing more of a 4 to 6 rep range, heavy duty style like Mike Mentz's training. Week 2, we'd do something like 10 to 15-ish reps, so more volume, more exercises, more sets, more reps. And then week 3, we'd be doing crazy workouts where we just do everything and try to throw everything at our body and try not to die. So for example, what I've got here is chin-ups superset with a wide grip pull down. Then I'll do T-bar rows, and I think I did drop sets there as well. And then I would do cable rows, pretty standard. I think there are some drop sets in there as well. And to finish with, we would do high rep deadlifts for around 20 reps, and we'd superset that with heavy tire flips. I've got no idea what was going through my coach's mind at the time. I've got no idea what was going through my mind at the time as I was doing this. I don't even know how I got through this, to be honest, because that's messed up. So let's rewind a little. Here is me back at 17 years old in around 2008. At this point, I'd already been going to the gym pretty seriously for about 3 or 4 years. Now, I didn't know much about the specifics of training or nutrition, but I was training consistently 4 to 6 times a week, and I was following some kind of structure to my nutrition. This was all based around whatever I could piece together just online on different forums, because stuff like this on YouTube weren't really a big thing. I don't know my exact body weight, but if I had to guesstimate, it probably was around 61 to 62-ish kilos. And this is pretty indicative of my natural frame. I've got a small bone structure and don't tend to store a lot of body fat. Here's another shot of me back when I was maybe 14 or so. I would have been training for at most about a year at this point, but again, not seriously, a lot more bodyweight stuff at home and the occasional gym workout. But you can already see just how naturally small my frame really is. So for me to be able to blow up to something like this is pretty ridiculous, and it took a ton of effort. Despite how things may look, this is actually a result of me spending more than 2 years straight following everything perfectly to a T, to the point of an unhealthy obsession. I remember after one of my workouts, I just finished training with my coach, I went to the change rooms, put on a suit, and came out of the change rooms, and my coach was like, "Eugene, what's going on?" I had to go to a funeral for a family friend who had just passed away. I was, of course, late to it, but it didn't matter to me because in my eyes, I'd done my workouts, I got my meals in, nothing else matters. I mean, I refused to eat anything that wasn't on my plan. I would skip out on my birthday, I would skip out on Christmas dinners, I would skip out on any single family affair that I could, just because I wasn't able to track my meals perfectly. Even something like Christmas dinner, where there was something like turkey or sweet potato that was being served up, I had a lot of anxiety around that because my plan may have said something like brown rice or chicken breast instead. I also was starting to feel pretty self-conscious about my body and how much body fat I was putting on. But even still, I trusted my coach and I trusted the process, and I continued to follow the plan perfectly. So what did my diet plan look like? I'm going to leave a couple of different diet plans up here on the screen for you to have a look at. One of them shows exactly what I was doing when I first ever started following a plan with my coach, and the other one is more indicative of how things ended up a couple of years later. Big thing to note with this one here is we've ended up with 10 total feedings throughout the day, with 6 whole food meals spaced out by 2 hours at a time. And if you look really closely here, what you'll also see is it wasn't just 300 grams of cooked rice, we bumped it up to 400 grams of cooked rice and up to 80 grams of mixed nuts by the end. So I was training with my coach every single day through this 2 to 3 year period. I'd drive out to go see him, he'd push me hard to my limits, and then we'd do some kind of check-in on a sporadic / semi-regular basis, depending where we're at in the year, and we'd make some changes. Typically what would happen is he'd have a quick look at me in the mirror and he'd check my body weight, and if things weren't increasing, he'd bump my food up. And this kept going for the better part of 2 years. We didn't do much more than that, which should have honestly been a big red flag to me. But again, I was young, impressionable, and most importantly, I put complete faith and trust into the process and to him as my coach. I can vividly remember just how much friction this created with my mum. She'd always be asking, why are you doing this? You're getting so big. This is not a good look. And in my distorted sense of reality, I would hear getting big as like, yes, this is a good thing. I'm getting freaky. I'm getting swole. I'm becoming Kevin Levrone or Evan Centopani, who are all the guys I was looking up to at the time, or I'd be watching videos on YouTube of them eating and making the gains, thinking, hey, I'm making the gains too. Now, this all culminated in the peak of my bulk in the middle of summer. I remember it was maybe January to February, which for you guys in the Northern Hemisphere is summer here in Australia. I got pneumonia. Crazy. Here I am, 18-year-old kid who should be young, healthy, peak of his health, eating my vegetables, training hard. And mind you, I'm a health professional working as a personal trainer in a gym environment, so I should be a very healthy, fit, active guy. And I wound up getting pneumonia and being hospitalized for nearly 2 weeks. It's messed up, isn't it? Now, it might sound obvious to you, but it's worth mentioning. What are the big takeaways here? First of all, quantity matters. Irrespective of what you eat, the overall amount that you ingest is really important. To me, it never crossed my mind that I was doing something that may not have been a good idea because I'd categorized foods as good or bad based upon whether they're on my meal plan. Chicken breast, good. Beef, good. Sweet potato, good. Roast turkey from Christmas dinner that I can't track accurately because I didn't cook it myself and I don't know what the actual thing is, bad. And of course, things like pizza, burgers, even cereals, bad. So I made this huge mistake in assuming that if the food was on my meal plan, it must be good and it can't do me any wrong. And I assumed that as long as I follow this plan perfectly to a T, I'm going to put on as much muscle mass as possible and not much fat. No matter how you want to spin it with different foods being good or bad, you absolutely can put on a considerable amount of body fat using clean foods, depending on how you want to define what a clean food even is. Now you might be thinking, Eugene, surely you noticed that you were putting on some body fat and getting uncomfortable, and I've kind of already mentioned that. Yeah, I was getting kind of uncomfortable with it. And that's the tricky thing about what's happening psychologically when you're going through these kinds of processes. It's kind of contradictory, where I could see myself and say, yeah, I'm putting on body fat. My face is getting rounder. I'm seeing these big, puffy red imprints from the sleeves of the elastic sleeves on my hoodies when I pull my sleeves off, take the jumper off. I had next to no visible separation or vascularity whatsoever. But at the same time, under the perfect lighting conditions with that down lighting, I might have had a slight, faint sliver of abdominal separation, maybe. It really wasn't, it was more just rolls of fat. But more importantly than that, I just trusted the process and was unhealthily obsessed with the goal in mind. One thing that I'm a pretty big believer in is that if you want to really learn a process, you have to immerse yourself in it completely. And you can't really pass judgment on something until you've gone through it yourself and have experienced it for yourself from the inside out to be able to truly understand it. So in my adolescent mind, I was kind of like, who am I as a complete beginner to speak up against my coach here and show distrust towards him when I've put all my trust and faith into him and his process? I said to him from day one, we've got 3 years where I want to bulk up and then get shredded for my competition. I trust you completely. I will follow you and do whatever you tell me to do. I put complete faith and trust in that process and said I'll see it through to the end. Because for all I know, it could be part of the whole process. Because again, you don't know what you don't know, right? Now, just so we're clear, I do not believe in taking that kind of a passive role in your learning experience. Nowadays, I believe in taking a much more active role in your learning experience and being confident in asking questions throughout the entire process. Not to be a dick, but to enhance your learning. That was another humongous takeaway from this entire process, and that's not just to follow things blindly, particularly just because somebody looks the part or maybe has even done some of the things that you want to be doing from an achievement perspective, doesn't mean they know how to translate that into a process that's going to make a lot of sense and give you the same results. Instead, I believe you should do your research, ask questions, formulate your own opinion, and actively use your coach more as a sounding board for collaboration as opposed to following things blindly. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes, and I hope even more that the industry is in a place now where those mistakes aren't even relevant, where the level of education at a very basic level to introductory beginners is enough that they don't fall into these common traps. The industry has come a very long way in the past 10 to 15 years or so. Good information is a lot easier to come by with things like YouTube, but there is still a long way to go. This is a big reason why I created Ganbaru the way that I did and designed it to not just be some prescriptive diet coach or training program that you follow, but to give you all the educational resources that teach you everything that you need to know about taking charge of your health, your training, your nutrition, everything both in and out of the gym. I'll leave a link in the description below for a no obligation free trial for you to check it all out. But for now, let's talk about what I would do differently today. If I was that same 17 or 18-year-old kid who was looking to put on as much muscle mass as possible for his bodybuilding debut, what would I do? I'd probably start out in a similar way where I'd be having some kind of baseline diet plan that I'd be following, and I'd be looking at making some kind of adjustments to it long term to make sure I'm moving in the right direction. I would definitely include a fair amount of education around meal plans in general and making sure I'm not creating a very rigid structure that has to be followed, but more so teaching the principles behind all the things that are being done with respect to nutrition. I definitely would not be doing tire flips. Nobody needs to be doing tire flips, especially supersetted with high rep deadlifts. And to further on that first point, nobody should be following a rigid plan that has no room for flexibility or education programmed into it. But in general, there's nothing wrong with this starting plan. Just give me some kind of baseline to start things with and then to make more informed decisions long term. But this is where it gets important. I would be a lot more specific in how I track my progress long term. Back then, all we cared about was body weight, a quick glance in the mirror, maybe, and looking at my training performances. If those things weren't going up, we'd eat more food. Now, I'd still be using those things, but I'd also be doing things like girth measurements and maybe even things like a DEXA scan to assess my body fat levels. I'd expect to see some fat gain as I went through this process, especially if I was doing it for 2 or 3 years at a time, but I'd be a lot more mindful and realistic about how much weight I can expect to be putting on each week or each month or each year and make sure I'm calibrating things accordingly. There are a lot of rough rules here, but if we said anywhere between maybe 1/4% to maybe 1% of your body weight could be a realistic rate of gain per month, that gives us a benchmark. And then if I was to see my body weight increasing by say 1% per week, that would be a red flag to say, hey, you're probably pushing things a little bit too hard, time to dial them back a little bit. I would also program in mini diets or at the very least maintenance periods throughout this entire process. I made a humongous mistake by setting myself this goal of saying I want to put on as much muscle as I can over this 2 or 3 year period and just push hard the entire time. Instead, I should have thought more about the long game and how beneficial it can be to take your foot off the gas every once in a while. There's no hard and fast rule here, but I would probably say if I'd noticed because I was tracking my body weight increases that things were getting a little bit too aggressive and accumulating too much fat over time, I'd probably put a halt to that and put myself down to a deficit or at least maintenance calories for a few weeks to make sure that stabilizes and maybe pull off a little bit of excess body fat. How long would I do it for? Don't really know. It really depends on how my results are going, how much body fat I've accumulated, and how quickly I can get it off realistically. But most important, I would have that as a strategy that I'll be looking at employing if I noticed body fat was going on too quickly or my body weight was going up too fast as well. Let me know your thoughts on all this, guys. I would love to hear some of your stories and perspectives from your history and early years of training. And hopefully, if you're a beginner who's just starting out, you're able to use my stories to help you avoid some of the common mistakes. And if you guys have any other questions, please do drop them below. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you guys next time.